We were once in touch. I think it was for I was interested in your services as a studio musician, like recording some keys and send it over, things like that. But
Right.
yeah. And that iMessage, I'm sorry, I didn't see that your message there. It's kind of a interesting tool that I don't use too often. That's why I was a little bit late with answering to you after you sent me the email.
Yeah, you're mostly a WhatsApp person, I'm guessing.
Everything, but this kind of thing, I didn't use that much, so that's why I was not
Okay,
so
well, we're
quickly.
connected now, so
That's true, yeah.
yeah.
Do you mind share a little bit about your musical background with things that maybe we are not too familiar with, like growing up?
Well, yeah, I grew up in a small town in Oregon that was a long ways from the nearest jazz. That was
Hmm.
probably in Portland, which was a couple hundred miles away. So I mostly studied classical music. I had a succession of 4 or 5 really quite good classical piano instructors.
Hmm.
Um, and for the most part, I wasn't that into classical music, but I liked the harmony of Debussy and Ravel and people like that. I didn't really come around to appreciating Bach until I was in my late 40s, when I finally sat down and played through one of the books that I
Hmm.
had when I was a kid and didn't enjoy. But 20 years after, writing a bunch of my own music, I could finally like appreciate how
Hmm.
ingenious that is.
Hmm.
So, I kind of got bit by the jazz bug when I was about 14 and started doing whatever I could to learn to play that, when I was a kid in a bedroom in Coos Bay, Oregon. But I loved the way Chick Corea played. I loved George Duke's playing. I love Cannonball Adderley, Herbie, Miles Davis, Clifford Brown. I found some of these records in a local community college
Hmm.
library, which was great. And, transcribed and tried to figure out what was going on, and, bought books from Jamie Aebersold and stuff like that. But it's very difficult to learn to do it that way. So finally, I, managed to engineer that I would go to the Berklee College of Music. My parents made a deal with me that they would give me whatever money it would cost to go to the University of Oregon for 4 years. And if that got me 2 years at Berklee, then I could spend it that way, which was a nice gesture of faith on their part. So I did. Berklee was a real eye opener for me. I had a lot of catching up to do when I went there, because, there were kids who had Dizzy Gillespie visiting their high school band and stuff like that there. And,
Hmm.
they had 3 levels of jazz band in their enormous high school and, on the East Coast or something. And I was the only person who was really into jazz in my whole town.
What about your
And Berklee,
parents? Parents were not into like musicians or something?
no.
No.
My mother is an excellent piano player, and
Hmm.
I have a great aunt who had an excellent ear. Like, you could ask her to play any tune, and she was just like, well, of course I can play that. And she would, just kind of crank it out pretty reasonably by
Hmm.
ear. So there's talent in my family, but they didn't listen, to any jazz.
Okay.
For my 14th birthday, I think it was, my mom went into the local record store and said, my son George is really into jazz. What records should we get him?
Hmm.
And the guy there knew what he was doing, because he gave them Dave Brubeck at Carnegie Hall and Keith Jarrett's Staircase Hourglass Sundial Sand, which is still my favorite Keith Jarrett record.
Hmm.
And that, of course, was a real eye opener. You can't believe that somebody sat down and spat that out just spontaneously, but that's exactly what happened. If you read his his biography, they made that record because they had made a classical record earlier in the day, and he and Manfred Eicher were both sitting there saying, this is an incredible piano, it's tuned incredibly, why don't you just go out there and blow some stuff? And that's what he did.
Uh-huh.
So, basically when I got to Berkeley, the first recital that I saw there was Branford Marsalis with Wallace Roney, Makoto Ozone, who was mind-blowing piano player. I think it was Smitty Smith on drums. This kind of all-star band of kids that were kind of my age or just a year older.
Mm-hmm.
And I had no idea who these people were. So I went there and to just see how my fellow students sounded. And it was those guys. So that scared me into the woodshed pretty seriously. After 2 years at Berkeley, which was great for me, great exposure, lots of,
some of the teachers there you studied with was Charlie
Jeff
Bonacos,
Cavell was my main piano teacher. And after a semester and a half, for my last semester, he said, I think you should get some exposure to a different teacher. And he recommended me to Ray Santisi.
Mm-hmm.
And Ray was the guy who taught Keith Jarrett when he was briefly at Berkeley.
Mm-hmm.
And he was kind of a legend. And I wish I had paid better attention, and I wish I had studied with him longer, because his harmonic concept is completely different than anything anybody else teaches.
Isn't that in the book that he wrote for Berkeley Press or something?
Probably so.
There is a book out. I have it somewhere, but I should work on it, not just.
Well, see, Ray's thing is the way it should be. Ray doesn't teach you about vertical structures. He doesn't show you D triad over C7. He gets you to first take the melody and harmonize it with a counter melody. And he has very specific rules, such as that if the melody is resolving, the harmony should be suspending and stuff like that to keep. You can hear it clearly in Keith Jarrett's playing. I don't know if he actually got it from Ray. Ray may have gotten it from him. But whatever it is, you can hear this 6-voice polyphony unfolding. It's all voice-led. And that's really how it should be done, I think. And then, whatever you call it later, if you want to figure out what label that structure would have, fine. But the basic thing is having 6 moving melodies. And not that many people, in fact, Keith is the only person I know who really does that. Bill Evans did a lot of cool voice leading, but it didn't feel like this. So yeah, so it was great. I got exposed to all kinds of things. I'd never considered writing for a big band before, and the ear training was cool. And mostly just the teachers were these older guys who had really been through the mill. Barry Nettles. Did you go to Berkeley at all?
No, but the name sounds familiar. Yeah.
Yeah, just guys who knew what you needed to know, and they would kind of teach the stuff that was in the Berkeley pamphlets, and then they would kind of get with you about what it was going to take to be a professional musician. So then after that, I went and studied privately with Jerry Bergonzi for 2 years, and that was where I really got the stuff that I use today. That he just makes so much sense. He and Charlie Bonacos kind of grew up together, so they taught the same sort of thing. It's I think it actually started with Barry Harris, but the idea of the 8-note scale and of minding which notes of the scale you put on the beat and which go between the beat and stuff like that.
So you guys would play duo, and he would give you advice?
Not as much as I would have liked. Jerry was a great piano player. He is a great piano player. So he would sit down, and it would feel a lot like Wynton Kelly, which of course is the gold standard, like hard to get at swinging musician. And I would kind of get from it, oh, listen to the way he articulates. He accents the notes between the beats rather than the notes on the beats. Look how far behind the beat he plays. Look how much sense it makes when he outlines the chord with the notes that are on the beat. He showed me approach patterns, which I think Barry Harris calls enclosures and stuff like that. And it took about 3 months to get myself off the 7-note scales and into the 8-note scales, and another 3 months to get some of this other stuff under my fingers. But that was kind of when I got to where I could play at a professional level. I mean, by the time I left Berkeley, I was doing faculty recitals and stuff like that. So I must have had something going on. And that, that was sort of what I needed to know to have everything make sense to me, and then, you know, go beyond that.
And
that was pretty much it for instruction.
And the writing was already a strong part back then when you started to learn how to play the piano. You wanted to learn how to compose, because we can maybe talk about that too, that you're writing a lot of for TV and composing and jazz and
yeah, that was an interesting, you know, I basically just wanted to be Chick Corea. So whatever Chick Corea did, I wanted to do it. And I wanted to be Herbie Hancock, and I wanted to be George Duke, and I wanted to be Joe Zawinul. Those, you know, I also wanted to be McCoy Tyner, and I wanted to be, you know, it's like on and on. And all those guys wrote beautifully.
Mm-hmm.
So it was always kind of in the back of my head that I would eventually start writing some music. But my first efforts at it resulted in some really nice tunes, but it took forever, like 6 weeks of grinding every day to excrete a 7-minute tune. And then I was in need of money. I was living in Manhattan at the time, and I got wind of an opportunity to mix stuff. I've always been really interested in producing and mixing and mastering too,
Mm-hmm.
and I still do a lot of that.
Mm-hmm.
And there was this guy, David Nickturn, who wrote a lot of music for soap operas, and he needed somebody to mix it. So I sent him an email, and he knew who I was, and he said, you know, I think you're way overqualified for what I'm willing to pay, but would you like to try writing this?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, sure. So I started writing music for As the World Turns, and that was a just cold heart thing where you if they play a minute of your music, the queue makes 240, 250, I think it was. David takes 125. The show takes the publishing. So David and I split 125. So I basically was making $62 a minute they played.
Mm-hmm.
But some days, you know, they, out of the library of stuff I created for them, they would play 10 or 12 minutes. And you know, kind of for doing nothing, I would make $600 or $700. And I thought that was a great day. So instead of being so stuck on having every note be perfect and capturing every emotion that a human can experience in one song and stuff like that, I started kind of just, you know, I'd get the cue to 80%, and keep moving.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next day I'd come in and revisit and get it to 90%. And kind of just by being more forgiving with myself, I completely got over my writer's block, and I wrote like 250 pieces of music for that.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it's like any other muscle, you know, the more you write, the better you're going to write. And that got me writing a lot. And I really enjoyed it. You know, I actually found scenes on the soap that had no dialogue so that I could write under it, because soap operas looked a little weird. The acting was pretty wooden. They almost never did a second take. Like if the actors managed to burble out the lines in any sort of coherent way, they moved on and filmed the next scene. So it wasn't like scoring The Lord of the Rings or something. You had to underpin the scene and add a third dimension without overwhelming,
Mm-hmm.
often kind of weak performances and weak the look of it. You know what it looked like. So it was really interesting, and that's where I kind of learned that the best thing you can do for me as a composer is kind of box me in a little bit, give me some fixed parameters, some dialogue, the look of the thing on the screen, and so forth. And that gets me thinking, oh, that what this needs is this,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to just a white piece of paper. So, yeah.
And this went, I mean, this is still going, this process. You're writing music for TV, for movies?
No, those shows all went off the air. I ended up working on 3 of them.
Mm-hmm.
And the last year of the last one, I don't even, was it One Life to Live? I think it was only online.
I see.
And we were nominated for an Emmy Award. And we had been nominated. It was like a little team of 5 or 6 guys who did the writing.
Mm-hmm.
And I assumed we weren't going to win because there was the other shows were still on TV. And I'm looking at Facebook one day, and it's like, isn't that Brian Lydell in a tuxedo holding an Emmy Award? And sure enough, it was. And we actually finally, the last year that I did it, which I think was 2014, Yeah, we won an Emmy Award. It was a really great gig. Even paying half the money to the guy I was ghostwriting for. Still, and anytime you weren't doing something else, you'd kick out a soap cue or two.
But this was like part-time, like you would play jazz gigs, you would teach maybe?
Oh yeah.
You
I
write
was
commercials?
working on a million things at that time. All through that, I was on the road with David Sanborn and Sadao Watanabe and Richard Bona and, sometimes the Brecker brothers.
When was that period? I read that it was a four-year period, right? Brecker brothers, that chapter.
Right. And then they did some kind of one-offs after that, but it was basically 92 to 96.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how did that happen, that gig? And maybe you can share some excitement details.
Yeah, well, that one, I had been kind of looking for opportunities to sort of work my way into the jazz scene in New York. And I had moved there in 84 and promptly ran out of money. So I went down to Florida and worked on cruise ships for a year with a really good band. If you know Jim Rotundi, the trumpet player, he was in it. Pat Mallinger, this great saxophonist who lives in Chicago, Wayne De Silva from Hawaii, really great players and very high expectations. So that was a good experience for me too.
You guys could play whatever you wanted, or there was a click track in the ear and you had to...
We did, even if we couldn't. People would come in and request 9 to 5 by Dolly Parton. We'd play it as a blistering fast bebop tune. There was a standing rule that if there was no one in the lounge, we didn't have to play, or we could play whatever we wanted. So sometimes we kind of played a little something that would make him go away, which is terrible, but it was quite fun. Then I did a year with Matt Guitar Murphy, and that was a really great experience. And again, top flight band. Matt himself was really great. And I always tell people I probably learned as much from listening to Matt play a slow blues in G as I learned from anybody anywhere. And then I got back from that and I got a phone call 2 weeks after I got back. Those were like 3-month tours in a van and econo lodges. And I get this call and someone says, "Hey, you've been recommended to play piano for Lyle Lovett." And I hadn't heard of Lyle Lovett. This was right when he was starting to really break out. And the bread was 2.5 times what I was making with Matt. But I wanted to sit in New York and see if I could get some jazz stuff going. And I didn't know who Lyle Lovett was. So I said, I just got off the road. So I think I'm going to have to pass on this one. And a week later, we're sitting on our moldy couch in Brooklyn, and they're on the Tonight Show. Who's on but Lyle Lovett? So, I kind of had botched that one, but it worked out okay. And then I started working with another excellent, I really have only turned down like 4 or 5 gigs in my entire life. And I got called to do this kind of funk band, wedding band thing in Connecticut. And again, it was just incredibly great musicians all the way through. And I learned a lot doing that gig too. And one day, Joel Rosenblatt, the drummer for Spyro Gyra, he knew all these guys. I had done a couple of things with him and a saxophonist named Dave Mann. Joel did this gig with this band called Swing Shift, and he recommended me to Ileana Elias, who was looking for a second keyboard player to play all the production on her beautiful records for at least a few gigs. And so I did that, and I remember one of the things Ileana had was she had this real nice kind of take 6 vocal tune where she had multi-tracked herself. And her harmony is really, really cool too. But she couldn't do it live because, we certainly weren't going to sing all those parts. But it went like one of these kinds of things. so I had an 8-track tape machine, and I sang all the parts. I figured out what they were, sang it all in there, chopped it all up so that each thing was a note on a chromatic scale, so I could play it boop, beep, like this. And she was quite impressed by that. And I made sure that I played all the production on her records and did a really great job. So when Randy Brecker, who at that time was married to Ileani, or they might have been just splitting up around then, asked her, you know, who should we get if we want to start doing some demos for this Return of the Brecker Brothers project? She recommended me, and that got that ball rolling. I was a very early adopter of, like, you know, sequencing on a computer, and, you know, we didn't have audio in the computer at that time. So I would, you know, record Randy on my 8-track tape machine and whatnot. And I could take his pretty crunchy little demos that he did on a little bitty Casio into a cassette machine and turn them into something. So that got me involved with them on that level. And I always thought it was the strangest thing, but it's kind of typical of those guys that they had never really heard me play a solo, I don't think. Maybe somebody came to a gig I was doing, but somehow they figured out that I could do the live gigs. So they asked me to do the live band. And I remember I was up by myself in this ski house in Killington when I got the call. I've never been that over the moon. And, you know, lo and behold, I ended up being a good choice for that. But I think it's interesting that they kind of did it on a little bit of a leap of faith. And like things tend to work out for them, it worked out.
And so, can I ask, is the I guess those gigs were keyboards oriented, synthesizer?
Oh, very much so.
Is that maybe the fact or reason because they knew you from the studio, from having the knowledge of different skills as well, that it was not the acoustic piano but more the electric side of it?
Yeah, that's a lot of it, you know. And if you think about what's on those records, I mean, there isn't even a keyboard player on the live record from my father's place. Barry Finnerty is playing the crap out of something called the Gitorgan. Sounds great on there, but so I think there was one tune that I certainly played acoustic piano as part of the backup, the orchestration of some of those tunes, like Spherical. But for the most part, it was sort of an electric gig. And, you know, the live gig, we started out with Mike Stern on the guitar, who's an amazingly great open orchestrator who listens really well. And Mike and I meshed right from the word go. And then after that, it was Dean Brown, who's another, like, of the tiny handful of people that I would call, if I really needed a great orchestrator and arranger, in the guitar chair. So right from the beginning, that gig had this really nice open feel to it. And people were, you know, for all the chops that existed in that band, people were really content to just have it open up and not be busy, you know. And that was part of the cool thing about that band was the dynamic range in it. It wasn't just something that went from 4th gear to 6th gear. It would go down to 1st gear, you know, at the beginning of a solo or something like that.
Was that planned? Like
no,
like
it was
a set list, or?
No, it was just everybody's maturity level. You know, Dennis Chambers is somebody who really loves it when the tune goes somewhere, and when there's a form and a shape and dynamics and stuff like that. You know, people think of him as like this, you know, and he is a powerhouse when it's called for. But ultimately, Dennis, I think he would be just as happy listening to a Bill Evans trio record and appreciating the tipping on that as he would, you know. And so that's a chair that's really important when you're shaping the dynamics of a band. And, you know, Dennis is amazing at it. Dave Weckl did it for a while. Dave's amazing at it. And we had Lenny White. Lenny, you know, can't beat that. It was just a great thing. Then we had Rodney Holmes, you know, another guy that has a really great sense of dynamics. So kind of just They chose wisely.
Mm-hmm. And
You know,
did you
James
mix the
Dean is on.
sound for the performances? Did you mix the sound?
Yeah.
Because that was something else that was on top, not just the playing.
Yeah, and I really wanted, you know, at that time I had 3 keyboards, a weighted keyboard, a
Mm-hmm.
76 note keyboard, and a 60 note keyboard. And I wanted as much cool stuff going on in there, as many different dimensions and atmospheres and attitudes and so forth as I could. So sometimes there was like a, you know, 3-way split on the bottom and a 4-way split on the middle, and then a bunch of sound effects or something on the top. And I think that, you know, it kind of worked. It gave me something to do if Mike was just going to play guitar, or Dean. And I like orchestrating like that, bringing a whole bunch of different colors in. So for me, it was just a total kid in a candy store. We didn't need 2 people playing chords, especially behind Mike. You know,
He played the
Mike would,
chords anyway by himself. Yeah.
yeah, and he didn't want you conflicting with him. And it took me a while to figure out that what he really wanted, whether it was acoustic piano or electric piano or organ or a synth sound or whatever, he wanted the McCoy Tyner sensibility. You know, fourths, open stuff, rather than you playing an upper structure triad over a, you know, which kind of, he could hear right away that was conflicting with the one that he was playing. But if you play the McCoy Tyner stuff, you know, and you kind of keep it
open.
Exactly. And when Mike goes out, you know, McCoy figured out that ingenious way of kind of chromatically taking himself out, so that it was like building tension with the soloist, but not pinning him in by playing that, you know. So, and Mike Stern has comped like that ever since the very first time I heard him, which is a very wise way to do it, and really easy for me to fit stuff in with too.
Yeah, and I'm sure you're familiar with, there is this great performance that's on YouTube, also taped from Barcelona. You guys play.
Yeah,
and I think your solo has been transcribed there too, and it's just an amazing performance to watch from afar. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a really interesting gig. You know, I was unbelievably nervous for the first couple tours that band did. I had certainly never done anything like that. The first gig we did was somewhere in Switzerland, and it was in front of 10,000 people, and at this big outdoor festival. And the truth is that we sounded damn good, like right from the very first gig, which was in Rochester. And I was listening to a tape of that, a cassette, after we did it, and it's like, wow, we didn't rehearse this stuff enough, but check out how great it came together. So yeah, but by the time we hit the Barcelona concert, though, I had been kind of dreading it a little bit for a long time, because it's
What does
intimidating.
It mean? What does that mean? That word? I'm not familiar with.
Which word?
That you just mentioned, that you were doing
intimidating?
What? No, that one I know for sure. The other one, you were trying to impress, or you were not nervous, or what was like the attitude?
Yeah, I was very nervous because it's nerve-wracking to have Mike Stern play a solo, then Randy Brecker play a solo, then Michael Brecker plays a solo, and then it's you.
And it's your turn.
And you know, you've never done anything at this level before. And the truth is that I could definitely hack it, but I was playing mind games with myself, and you know, just more nervous than I should have been, and I didn't quite get my flow going for those first couple tours. But on that night, I managed to play a pretty good solo on that tune, Above and Below, which I think is the only solo I took on the whole night. And then I could relax.
Yeah, and the sound on the keyboards or on the synths,
That was a sound. When I was working on the cruise ships, I couldn't afford a DX7, but I could afford a DX100, which was this little bitty, it had a micro keyboard, really a cool little synth. Wasn't touch sensitive or anything, but there was a sound in there called mono lead. And the minute I played it, I just loved it. It sounded like those Chick Corea Mini Moog leads, except a little more solid. And it was a single trigger thing where you could kind of play like Holdsworth if you played legato. So when I finally got my DX7, I spent a bunch of time looking, because you could edit on the DX100 and figuring out the structure of the operators and how it worked and what made it sound like that. And I recreated it manually in the DX7. Then I imported that into the DX7 II. Then I imported that into the SY99, which is what I'm playing on the Barcelona video.
Okay.
And from there, it went to the EX5. And, I would do whatever it took to get that in there because I still really like playing that sound.
Yeah.
And now it's in the synth called FM8, which is in Mainstage.
Yeah. I was going to ask, I was interested in the delay that there is when you hit the key until the sound comes. If I'm not mistaken, there is sometimes a little bit of delay, so you have to play very on top of the beat. Isn't that true?
No, I've never experienced that.
It comes out right away.
Yeah, I had a funny conversation with Paul Jackson Jr. I was playing with Sanborn, and he was playing with somebody else at this jazz festival in Temecula. We were switching the stage during sound check. And he saw that I was using a laptop, and this was like in 2010 or something. It's before everybody was, but I was kind of an early adopter. And he says, "So, man, how are you doing with the latency on that thing?" And I said, "Well, to me, that's just my automatic Wynton Kelly. It's like it lays everything back behind the beat." At the buffer size that I run, I don't notice it. When I was working with Michael Brecker on his EWI, those power books were not powerful enough to do what he needed them to do unless we set the buffer to 256. And that's right there you start to notice that something's not right. But Mike was so determined to do it on the power book that he just kind of coped with that latency. Yeah.
So it didn't affect your playing when you played with the band?
Yeah, I mean, basically the amount of latency that you get is equivalent to moving the monitor 3 feet further from your head. So it's kind of negligible, And if you're on in-ear monitors, you probably actually want a little latency because it's not natural to play something and instantly have it appear in your skull, So.
Yeah. Let's talk shortly about some other stuff I wrote down to have some things to drop in. I came across your beautiful, I think it is an app, a groove app with groove tracks one can practice to. Can you tell quickly about that? I think 2015, a friend of mine told me about that one.
Yeah, that was a really cool project. And I just decided I was launching a personal sort of online subscription-based lessons thing, which I ended up teaching at Artist Works. So we kind of mothballed that. But as part of that, I wanted to make an app that I called it Burn, because I wanted it to be tracks that were really fun to burn out to. So, I figured out 3 different chord progressions. One was a minor blues, one I forget what it was, and one was sunny changes. That was like a minor one. And I made a bass line for each of these things. I did the whole thing in the sequencer, but then I hired Joel Rosenblatt to play drums on it. And the tempos were not beginner tempos. And I fixed it so that you could change the key. And I did that the hard way by just, making the bass line in 12 different keys and recording a chunk of audio that looped. And then you could mute the comping, or you could mute the bass if you were a bass player. You could mute the drums if you were a drummer. And it worked great. And I got this friend of mine to make those really funny graphics that were on it. So like when you mute the keyboard player, I think he's smoking a joint. Like the icon changes to this guy smoking a blunt.
I'm not familiar with that one.
Oh well, it was quite funny.
I was
and
focusing
clever.
on the music. Yeah.
Yeah, and it worked really well. And then due to kind of a personal situation, the guy who did all the app development wasn't available to update it when the phone went to 64 bits. You just needed to recode it so that it could. And the other problem with that one was that right around that time, I was getting divorced and I didn't have the money to advertise it, to get it out there into people's consciousness.
I think there's a Latin track as well, as far as.
Oh yeah. Yeah, there was a swing track and a Latin track and a funk track.
A lot of fun. Thank
yeah,
you
it was
so much.
really a cool app. You know, maybe someday I'll resurrect it. The other thing about that is that there was so much audio in it that it was a pretty big app. It was like 300 megabytes at a time when most people had an 8 gigabyte phone. And, you know, a lot of that is email and their music library and so forth. But these days that doesn't make any difference. So I might try to resurrect it and make it bigger and better, because when I teach lessons, I have a huge library of play along tracks that I've made, and you know, Joel's playing drums on these too, and I play bass, usually organ B3 bass on them, because iReal Pro and things like that, to me, they're just not swinging. And you wouldn't expect that, you know. Something is reading off a real book and trying to cobble together a mechanical track. But I think it makes all the difference in the world to have a good grooving play along track.
Absolutely, yeah.
You know, the best of the Abersolds are like that. The Paying Dues record. I can think of a few others that, and I made a couple Brecker Brothers. I made a Brecker Brothers and a David Sanborn play along for Jamie Abersold. And everybody always telling me how much they enjoy playing with those, and they're fun, you know? Yeah.
Is Joel playing in your trio, the Third Rail?
No, I always love playing with Joel in any context, but he's kind of an East Coast guy. So my trio is Tom Brechtlein and Yannick Gwizdala. Yeah. And you know, we're looking to kind of figure out a way to get back. We did a pretty good 3 nights at the Cotton Club in Tokyo. Get back out there and do that kind of stuff. But the truth is that things are still kind of a mess with the COVID thing.
Yeah.
You know, I wasn't in Europe this summer. I did a bunch of stuff in the States with a whole bunch of different artists. But people told me that it was rough over there. Like baggage handlers went on strike, and you know, they didn't have enough people to staff the desks, so flights got canceled because people had COVID. And
yeah, a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah, the war in Ukraine was a factor too. In Japan, they're still not really wide open to start having Western acts through some of those clubs anymore. So once that opens back up, we're going to get back out there, though.
Concert for Peace, when was that?
That was in 2012. Yeah, and then, you know, what are you supposed to make of that?
Which piece was that?
What's that?
Which piece was that meant about?
That was just a general, you know, Herbie and Wayne and Carlos really just have always been sort of working on that project. I've done a bunch of other stuff for Herbie and the LA Phil since, some of which was similarly themed. We did some music for Angela Davis. But that one, you know, Herbie wanted to be able to just kind of focus on the piano on that one. So he called me to see if I wanted to do it. And of course I'm going to do that. And, you know, so that was a blast.
Was that collaboration starting with you being an early fan, getting in touch with him, and one day you started working with him, or how did that happen?
Mike Brecker put me in touch with him to work on his technical stuff, because I was I had built this elaborate environment for Mike in Logic that still, I have one student who I'm working with who's taken that like and multiplied it by 10. But Herbie has always been a techno guy, and he wanted to know what I was doing for Mike and what I could do that would be interesting for him in Logic. And this was before Mainstage came out. So we got together and I built a whole bunch of stuff in Logic as a way for him to play virtual instruments and host them and do all kinds of crazy stuff with them. You know, I have an emulator that I built of Oberheim's rotate mode, which is how Mike originally we brought along an Oberheim synthesizer that Rob Kilgore had showed him how to do that with. And eventually I made it so it could work on the PowerBook. But then one day I was at Herbie's and we were working, and Herbie likes to work really late at night. Like if you can start at 11, that's when he's all the way up and the creative juices are flowing. And we were sitting there and he goes, I want to hear some of your stuff that's not jazz. And I don't know what even prompted him to wonder about that, you know, but he must have heard something from somebody. And I said, well, okay, you know, I've got this whole page with like 60 film cues on it. And, you know, have a listen. And so to my amazement, we sat there for a couple hours and Herbie would hit play on one of these cues and listen all the way through. And then he'd hit play on the next one. And at the end of that, he says, I think I have a project for you. And I said, well, you know, of course, I'm down. What is it? And he gave me these duet tapes that he and Wayne Shorter had done in like the 90s, I think it was. Some were from somewhere. I think they were from Argentina or something. A little bit of them were from Japan. And it's those guys at the peak of their telepathic powers, totally unscripted. You know, you'll hear this thing for like 7 minutes, and finally Wayne plays a little bit of the melody to Footprints, and you're like, oh, it's been that this whole time? But they're just going for it. And at one point I asked Herbie something, I love his answer. We're listening to these and they're just mind-boggling. That two people can be that in tune. But I asked him, you know, you and Wayne used to do this in the 60s at sound check? And he just goes, oh no, we could never have done this back then. And they were pretty damn good back then, but they weren't this good, you know, and they had continued to grow and evolve. So I took those and wrote an orchestra under it. And Herbie was loving it, and he decided he had a little swing of 3 orchestra gigs he was doing. We printed a couple out. He went and played them. 2 of the orchestras really killed it. One kind of killed it the other way.
So you arranged for violins and everything?
Oh yeah, 86 pieces. So and I learned a lot from doing that. What's that?
So that must have been like those were tapes that were improvised by Herbie and Wayne?
No, so I wrote the orchestra, and then Herbie would play live to it, and Wayne wasn't with us for those. So Herbie just kind of used the orchestration that I had written on these tunes, and that kind of got me with Herbie as a orchestra arranger and kind of orchestrator and collaborator. So, and then since then we've done 3 or 4 concerts with the LA Phil, playing my arrangements of all these different tunes of Herbie's, and some of them, like Chameleon, we did an arrangement of that. Butterfly, we did an arrangement of that. For the Angela Davis concert, we did a tune of his called Ostinato for Angela Davis, which is on one of the Mwandishi records. And that one's just 2 bars of an ostinato, and it just keeps repeating. And, on the original record, they're taking it really to the moon, like only those guys could. So that one, I wrote a 6.5-minute arrangement of that, figuring that's what they needed. And I kept that little line. It's in 15. And I kept that thing going all the way through, but changed the orchestration and just kind of, you know, total just use your imagination thing. That's what Herbie wants. And then they told me they needed 12 minutes of that one. So I just kept going. And then you get to hear it played by the Phil, which is a ridiculously great orchestra, and Herbie's band, which is Herbie, Lionel Lewicki, Vinnie Colaiuta, James Genus, and Terrace Martin. And, you know, you just sit there and bliss out. It's like you created this rocket ship and look at what these guys are doing with it, you know.
Beautiful. And there will be more of that? Or, I mean,
you know, I sure hope
work.
so. There's none on the calendar for this coming year. Herbie's going to play at Disney Hall, but it's just going to be his quintet. But you know, there was talk of making a record of these things, of all the arrangements we had done, and I think we just needed one or two more to finish that. So I'm hoping we get a chance to do that.
Yeah, it would be awesome.
Yeah, you know, Herbie went to London and played some of these things with the London Symphony, and
the royalties keep coming in.
No, you know, most of the royalty generating stuff I did was for TV or for pretty limited run, like, you know, releases on Showtime and stuff like that.
I mean, the orchestra stuff that you
what's
just
that?
wrote. I mean, the orchestra stuff that we were talking about now.
But you never get royalties for that. That's arranging. So if there was any royalties generated, it would be for Herbie for writing these pieces.
I see.
Yeah, so that's just like a cash buyout kind of gig. Yeah. So.
Well, my last kind of question is technically on the piano or keyboards. Is there something over the years that you're doing and keep doing and try to figure out new stuff or working on music?
Well, very much. You know, over the years, I've practiced in a bunch of different ways. And I've been teaching really seriously for, you know, a decade now, probably. And the more of it I do, the more, and any of my students at artistworks.com will tell you that I'm a real harpy about the time. You don't have to play very much if you're grooving and if you're touching it in the right way. You know, when I start people out with those lessons, and I'm going to go today and help some high school students who won these jazz scholarship awards. They're going to play with a big band at our little local jazz festival. And you can play a really nice solo on a blues with just a one minor pentatonic scale. If it's an F blues, play a F minor pentatonic scale. And if you're touching it the right way, and if your time is cool, people will love it. And you can play for a long time before they figure out that, oh, he's only playing 5 notes, isn't he? But so I spend way more time now with people. Let's just get that little collection of 5 notes. Let's not learn 3 different scales. Let's not do any of that. Let's get that little collection and get you where you have that experience of swinging and laying back and feeling like the notes you play are important because of where you put them in time. And, you know, let's get your dynamic range going. Let's get you articulating, you know, so that you're accenting between the beats and stuff like that. And that gets people up on the wave faster. I think it's easy to turn people off by hitting them right away with, okay, well, this is an 8-note scale. You need to learn it. You need to play it from the third, the first, the tonic, the third, the fifth, the seventh. And in my own practice, for 40 years now, and I took a break while I was with the Brecker Brothers, but I used to start every single day by playing what I call my ugly Hannons, which go. And I have the metronome on 2 and 4. And what I'm doing is taking something that's so dumb that you could remove half your brain and still play it. And all I'm focusing on is maximum dynamic range. The loud notes are really loud. The quiet notes are really quiet. And the time, I want to be playing a real rolling triplet. You know, Bergonzi was big on that. We would sit there and listen to Elvin play, even at a really up tempo. There was always a triplet somewhere on the kit between the hi-hat and the snare, or between the ride and the hi-hat, or somewhere. And then I'm constantly experimenting to see how far behind the beat I can play. And that's what makes it ugly, is that I'm trying to play almost to the point where I drop a beat, but I'm working on being comfortable behind the beat. And I've been doing this since I left Berklee. And when I was with the Brecker brothers, I started, we didn't have time to practice. So I made a one chorus loop of giant steps. I would play that in my headphones and blow over it. And it's like, okay, I'm done. But I found that I missed that thing of starting out focusing only on the time and are my shoulders hanging, because I had a bad habit of getting where I was going like this. And then, you're playing like you're nervous. You are nervous. Your body is telling you you're nervous. So am I breathing well? Am I sitting well? Is my hand comfortable? How's my time? All this stuff while I'm playing this mindless little exercise. So, and that keeps me feeling, it kind of gets my fingers ready for what I'm going to do later. And lately, that's always involved playing a minor or dominant modal thing and visiting all 12 different pentatonic scales one at a time. And one of the things that I teach when people want to learn how to play outside is how to do that and have it sound seamless and like, whoa, he's outside, but then you always stick the landing, because it's not enough to just go venturing outside the key and it just sounds like you're lost. You have to have a way that you're going to get out and back in. And I find that if I do that, it forces my hand into a bunch of shapes that I haven't found before. And that kind of unlocks some kind of creativity, so that when I do then play All the Things You Are, or the solo changes to Spain, any of the things that I like to play just to go exploring, I'm not just playing the same old stuff.
So how laid back can you play then when you practice that? I mean, are you testing drummers then?
No, I never do this with drummers. But, you want to be, I always kind of hold out Dexter Gordon as a great example of somebody where everything he plays has this, it's almost like a sense of royalty to it. He's way back behind the beat in this place that he's really confident of it. And I think a lot of what people, even people who don't think they're jazz listeners, when they tune in and they hear a real master jazz musician playing, I think what they like is the idea that this person is pulling this stuff out of thin air, but they're doing it with that great confidence. And if you're playing on top of the beat, that says that you're nervous. And people don't they go to hear mastery. They don't go to hear a nervous person rushing so that they can get to the end of the solo quicker. And yet, unless we're from Cameroon or Senegal or one of those places, we all seem to be born a little bit on top of the beat. And it's a discipline that I at least really needed to work on to get to where I could consistently be really relaxed and consistently, like when I hear it back, it's like, yeah, that's pretty much where I was hoping I was putting that. It's, it's a mind game that we play with ourselves. And at some point, I'm going to write a very different kind of book on how to play jazz. And I'm going to spend a fair amount of time talking about those head games. Right now, the Bible of that is Kenny Werner's book, Effortless Mastery, which is really a great book. Have you ever seen that?
I have not read it, but I know it's out there. Yeah,
it's out there, and I know a lot of top shelf professional musicians who Randy Brecker told me that it got him over a bunch of writer's block once. And he really deals with the issue as it is, which is attaching our self-esteem to how well we're playing the piano that night. And that just weights it down. And this is kind of what was in my head when I was like really nervous playing with the Brecker brothers that first couple tours. And it just doesn't belong there. You know, and it could only be written by Kenny Warner. There's a chapter that starts out, he says, go to your kitchen, find a plastic bag, put it over your head and tie it tightly around your neck. Now ask yourself, does it really matter whether I played a great solo on that song last night? Does it matter whether this new song I'm writing is going to break new ground in jazz songwriting? And then my favorite, he goes, does it really matter if Cecil Taylor is for real?
I think he just wants to get rid of great piano players with that plastic bag, right?
Maybe so. He's trying to eliminate the competition. Because there's probably people who put the plastic bag on and they go, yeah, it sure does matter whether I play a great
dangerous book, but yeah, we'll try to get
no,
it.
But it comes with a CD full of meditations. And just even reading the text, he makes a really good case for how absurd it is to have our self-worth riding on how we play. And the minute you unhook that, now you get out there and you relax. You know, I got into psychotherapy in 1996. And after about 6 months, I adopted this attitude that I'm going to go out. There's a small percentage chance that it's going to just suck. It's likely to be great, but I'm going to go for it. You know, my friend Dean Brown is a really good example of that. Dean says that before he hits the stage, like and he's, you know, been doing this for 40 something years. He says that he gets this moment of like kind of, you know, stage fright thing that comes over him. And he goes out and just on the first tune, he just blasts right through it. It's like, I'm leaving it all on the stage. And, you know, so, I mean, I can count on one hand the number of gigs that I've done where I've got off the stage in the last 15 years or 20 years and thought, wow, I don't know what happened there, but I hope it doesn't happen again. And, you know, who knows? It's some weird alchemy. Maybe you ate some bad shrimp or who knows what it is.
Yeah,
but the minute you release yourself from needing to go out there and wow people or at least feel good about how you played or something like that, the whole issue goes away. And then you just always do play great. Or at least you play to your potential. I should say that.
Yeah, relaxed, and it's always good to know that everyone deals with the same issues with stage nervousness, even if they play great anyway. So
yeah, you know, some people, I'm meaning to do a survey, you know, because Artist Works has all these really great instructors there. Peter Erskine teaches drums, Eric Marienthal teaches sax, Dave Stryker is teaching guitar, and they've got all these other people from all these other disciplines, you know, great banjo and stuff. To do like just see how many of them are willing to do a little 5-minute interview like, did you have stage fright and what did you do? Because I think most of us, a lot of us at least, got into music as a way to try to kind of validate ourselves. And that's larding it down with expectations that don't belong on something that should be joyful too. You know, Chick Corea seems like somebody to me that just had so much natural ability, and Herbie too, that maybe they didn't have so much stage fright to overcome, but I would be fascinated to talk to Herbie at least.
Was that letter ever answered? Somewhere I read, or maybe you told it or wrote it somewhere, that you wrote probably letters to some of those guys. And
I wrote a letter to Chick Corea when I was like 14 or 15 years old. And I said, can you just answer me one question? There's no way you're just pulling this stuff out of your butt. You know, are you really improvising this stuff? And of all the people to choose, you know, he was the most spontaneous, like improvisational musician I can think of. And he never responded. I got this funny book of philosophy that he wrote, and it wasn't even a bound book. It was like, you know, mimeographed pages in a folder.
The Anecdotes, you mean?
What's that?
I think it's called The Anecdotes or something like that. Or
I don't know. It almost read more like The Prophet by Khalil Gibran. And it was just kind of poetry almost about playing music. And in there, they had a contact page. So I sent him that. And, you know, many, many years later, when I was out with the Brecker brothers, actually, I finally met him. And that was an interesting, just a little discussion. We were playing at this festival in Turkey. It rained like hell, and the Turks just partied like nothing. Nobody left. And I've always admired that audience since then, but it was a double bill with Chick. So I finally got to meet him and shake his hand. And we were talking, and I said, you know, so what's next for you? And he says, well, I'm going to do an acoustic trio record, a couple acoustic solo records, and I'm doing some stuff with symphony orchestras. And this is 1992 or 93. And he says, and I said, really, no electric stuff? And he goes, you know, I think I'm just done with it. And I said, really? And he says, yeah, I never felt like I was very good at it. And I said, really? You got a whole generation of guys like me into it. And he says, yeah, but you know, I feel like it's Zawinul's first voice. Like he speaks through that in a way that I speak through the piano. Mm-hmm. So I think I'm just done with it. And of course, he went on and did a lot more of it. Mm-hmm. But I thought that was just a weird, frank assessment because, man, him on the Rhodes and the Mini Moog, mm-hmm. just peerless, you know. But it's, you know, he gets more of his color out of the piano. So
and he had an excuse ready for the unanswered letter. Or...
Yes, I really came down on him about that. I don't think I even mentioned it to him.
That's nice.
Yeah. Beautiful. And, you know, of course, over time, you figure out that it actually is possible to play like that, even as you marvel at the level he got it to. He and, I mean, I could name 100 different guys whose playing just boggles the mind, but.
So tonight, is tonight the concert where you teach the competition guys some licks? Or
no, that's on Thursday.
Oh, that's Thursday.
And I'm going to try not to teach them licks, but on almost everything, there's a way to play very competently through it with just one scale. At least if it's kind of a tonal standard. You know, usually I start people out with the F blues, and then we play Autumn Leaves, and you can play Autumn Leaves quite nicely with just two scales, kind of alternating them every couple bars. So I'm going to show them that kind of thing, because, you know, these aren't kids who are going to major in music in college or anything like that, but they played good enough to win these very nice scholarships from our little local jazz festival. And so they're going to play with the big band on Thursday. And I would be mighty nervous if I didn't have notes to play. And you know, there's a drummer there who's a pretty good little drummer, and we have an excellent drummer here in town who will be kind of helping him learn to do that, you know, too. Just try to get him as comfortable as we can. Yeah.
Yeah, it was fantastic talking to you, George. I thank you very much for having this easy chat and for sharing some of your your knowledge or your wisdom and whatever you're doing was great to hear it from you.
My pleasure.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Thanks a lot. Yeah.
Good. We'll meet in person one day.
I hope so.
Hopefully before too long.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Okay, see you later, George. Thank you so much.
See you later. Yep.
Bye.